It was a typical Miami night. The city was alive, with neon lights flickering on every corner, casting an electric glow on the bustling streets. The scent of salt water filled the air, and the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore created a soothing backdrop to the chaos of the nightlife. Miami was alive in every sense, a city that never slept, full of tourists and locals seeking their own slice of paradise. But beneath the bright lights and the carefree hum of the city, something darker was waiting. Emily, a young tourist from Chicago, had come to Miami for a long overdue vacation. She was looking for the sun, the sand, and a break from the hustle and bustle of her everyday life. Miami, with its reputation for wild nights and beach parties, was the perfect destination for her. She had heard the usual stories about haunted places, whispers of ghosts, and eerie happenings, but she never put stock in such tales. After all, she was a modern woman with a pragmatic view of the world. Ghosts, hauntings, urban legends were just stories people told to spice up their lives. Nothing more. Her first few days in the city had been filled with the usual touristy fun: sightseeing, shopping, dining at upscale restaurants, and taking in the vibrant culture that Miami offered. But tonight, she wanted something different. She wanted to experience the beach without the crowds, to see the water under the moonlight, to let the cool ocean breeze wash away the chaos of the city for a while. She had slipped away from her group of friends earlier that evening, claiming she wanted a moment of solitude. They didn't mind. They were busy enjoying the nightlife and the thrumming beats of the clubs along Ocean Drive. Emily, on the other hand, was more than content with a peaceful stroll along Miami Beach. She found herself walking further down the shoreline, away from the busy parts of the beach, toward a quieter stretch where the waves seemed to crash against the sand more intensely. The farther she went, the more the crowd faded, the sound of music and laughter slowly dying in the distance. All that remained was the soft murmur of the ocean and the occasional creak of the sand beneath her feet. The moon hung high in the sky, a perfect silver disk casting a cold glow across the water. And for a moment, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was alone, yes, but the solitude was comforting, not lonely. She breathed deeply, inhaling the salty air, and felt the tension of the past few days melt away. As she continued walking, the beach stretched on, eerily empty. There were no vendors, no late-night joggers, and no other tourists. It was as though she had wandered into a forgotten corner of Miami Beach. It was strange, because usually the beach never seemed empty, especially at night, when people gathered to relax by the water or take in the nightlife. But tonight, this part of the beach was deserted. The sand was untouched, the shoreline undisturbed. Emily slowed her pace, taking in the sight. It felt peaceful at first, almost magical. But then something shifted. A strange sensation crawled up her spine. a whisper in the back of her mind telling her something wasn't right. She shook it off, chalking it up to her overactive imagination. After all, she was alone in a foreign place, walking on an empty beach at night. Anyone would feel a little on edge. That's when it happened. A faint sound reached her ears. It was distant at first, like the soft rustling of the wind, or maybe the sound of the ocean. But as the sound grew louder, it became unmistakable. A whispering scream. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The scream didn't sound like the typical human cry for help. There was something more to it. It was distorted, muffled, almost as though it was coming from deep beneath the sand. Emily stopped walking, her feet frozen to the spot, as her eyes darted around in confusion. There was no one in sight, no one to scream, no one to cry out. Her heart began to race. She couldn't explain why, but a deep sense of dread settled in her chest. She glanced nervously to her left and then to her right. The beach was still empty. She turned around and looked back in the direction she had just come from, but nothing. The dark shoreline stretched on in both directions, silent and unmoving. The scream came again. This time, it was clearer, sharper, more urgent. It sent a chill down her spine. Emily's breath caught in her throat as her eyes widened in shock. The sound didn't just come from the air. It seemed to come from the very earth beneath her feet, like something was calling out to her from deep below the sand. Her pulse quickened and her mind raced. Was it the wind? No. It was too human, too raw, too desperate. She scanned the beach again, her feet unwilling to move. The sound echoed once more, and Emily felt a cold shiver run down her back. She clenched her fists, trying to calm herself, trying to make sense of what was happening. She had read about strange sounds on the beach. Some people said it was the wind playing tricks with the waves. Others claimed it was the calls of distant sea creatures. But this was something different. The scream was closer now, and she realized, with a sudden burst of fear, that it was not just a sound. There was a feeling attached to it, an overwhelming sense of fear, a plea for help, or perhaps something far darker. Without thinking, Emily took a few steps back. She was about to turn and head back toward the crowd when something stopped her. Something strange. Something that made her freeze in place. A movement in the sand. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable. A small ripple in the surface, like a wave of heat rising from the sand. But then, it became more pronounced. The sand shifted again, and Emily's eyes widened as she saw something moving beneath the surface. It was slow at first, almost imperceptible. But as she watched, the sand began to bulge, rising in small, uneven piles, as if something beneath was struggling to push its way up to the surface. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a step backward, unable to tear her eyes away from the strange sight unfolding in front of her. The scream echoed again, clearer than before. This time, she didn't hesitate. Fear flooded her veins as she spun around and started to run. Her feet pounded against the sand, faster and faster, but the eerie, whispering scream followed her, growing louder with each step. It felt like it was right behind her, almost as if it was reaching out, trying to drag her back into the depths of the beach. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted toward the more crowded areas of Miami Beach, her legs aching with every stride. She glanced over her shoulder one last time, but the beach was still empty, the sand undisturbed. Yet, the scream, it was still there, echoing in her mind. And she knew, deep down, that something was waiting for her. Something that called out from beneath the beach. Something that was alive. The morning after Emily's strange encounter on the beach, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The image of the shadowy figure beneath the sand haunted her dreams, and the scream echoed in her mind as if it had woven itself into her very thoughts. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was calling out to her, and she needed answers. After breakfast, she decided to go out and explore a bit more, hoping the busy city atmosphere would clear her mind. She wandered the streets of Miami, trying to lose herself in the energy of the day. But no matter where she went, stop thinking about what happened the night before. The silence of the empty beach, the strange scream, and the unsettling sensation that something or someone was lurking beneath the surface. It felt like the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Around noon, Emily found herself in a small, cozy cafe, tucked away on a quieter street. The place had a charming, old-school feel to it. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and soft jazz music played in the background. It seemed like the perfect... As she sipped her drink, she overheard a conversation at the next table. Two older men sat across from each other, their voices low but audible. They were speaking in hushed tones, but their words caught Emily's attention immediately. "I tell ya, every year it gets worse," one of the men said, his voice rough, like he had spent a lifetime smoking cigarettes. "People don't believe it, but that curse is real, and it's only a matter of time before it claims another victim." The other man nodded grimly. "I remember when I was a boy, they said the beach was safe, but we all knew the truth. The curse of Miami Beach. People were warned, but some never listened. And now, look what's happening. It's all happening again." Curiosity piqued. Emily leaned in slightly, pretending to read her phone while listening to their conversation. She tried to keep a low profile, not wanting to appear as though she was eavesdropping. But the mention of a curse immediately made her heart race. The pieces of the puzzle from the night before started to click into place. But she needed more information. She had to know what they were talking about. The man One of the old men continued, his voice a bit more hushed now, as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. Jackson Moore. He was a fisherman, a good man, but the city turned on him, betrayed him for something he never did. They killed him, buried him beneath the sands of that very beach. And his spirit, it never rested. Emily's curiosity deepened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, but a part of her felt that strange, unsettling connection between the curse and the scream she had heard the night before. The curse keeps him trapped, you see, the other man added, his eyes narrowing as if he was recalling something terrible. Every year, he rises from the sand, and it's always the same. He's out there, waiting. Anyone who dares venture too far at night, anyone who has even the slightest connection to those who wronged him, they'll be his next victim. The first man shook his head slowly. It's vengeance, pure and simple. Jackson Moore didn't just want to die quietly. No. He wanted revenge for what they did to him. He wanted to make sure no one would forget him, that his death wouldn't be in vain. Emily couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. She had heard of urban legends before, ghost stories passed down from one generation to the next. But something about the way these men spoke, with such conviction, made her question everything. Was this just a story? Or was there truth to it? The first man continued, his voice growing darker with every word. It's been happening for decades, you know. The killings, the disappearances. Each year, someone new falls victim to Jackson's wrath. No one knows when it will happen or who it will be, but there are always signs. The scream, the shadow in the sand, the feeling that something isn't quite right. And if you're not careful, you might find yourself drawn into it too. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard the scream and the shadow. Was it possible that what these men were describing was real? Could the scream she had heard be connected to this curse, this vengeful spirit rising from the sand? She had to know more, but she couldn't bring herself to interrupt their conversation. The second man took a long sip of his drink before continuing. They say Jackson Moore was wronged by a group of powerful people in this city. He wasn't just some fisherman. He was a man with a family, with a life. But they betrayed him, framed him for a crime he didn't commit, took everything he had. And when he tried to fight back, they silenced him, left him to die out there, buried under the sands. But the thing is, when they buried him, they buried the wrong man. They buried a soul that would never rest, a man who had nothing left to lose. A heavy silence fell over the table as the two men exchanged a look, one filled with a quiet understanding that only years of living in Miami could bring. Emily could barely breathe as she processed the information. Jackson Moore, betrayed and left to die, his spirit trapped beneath the very sands of the beach. Could this be the same place she had heard the scream? Was it possible that the curse of vengeance was real, and that Jackson's anger was still alive, lingering beneath the sand, waiting for the next person to uncover the truth? Every year, the first man said softly, his eyes narrowing, someone else falls victim. And there's no stopping it. No one ever talks about it openly, but the signs are there. If you listen closely enough, you can hear the screams of those who came before. And if you're unlucky enough to be drawn in, well, you'll become a part of the legend, just like everyone else. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she realized what she had to do. She couldn't let this go. The scream, the shadow, everything she had felt on that beach, it all had to mean something. But she wasn't sure she was ready to face whatever was waiting for her. "Do you think it could happen again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, betraying the fear she felt creeping up on her. The second man's expression grew solemn. "It already is. It's always happening. And if you've heard the scream, if you've felt the pull of the sand, then you might already be too late." Emily's mind was spinning, and her thoughts swirled like a storm. She had to find out more. She had to understand this curse and its connection to the scream she had heard. Was Jackson Moore's vengeance still alive, waiting for the next victim? And if she was part of this story now, what would happen to her? The old men fell silent, and Emily quickly finished her coffee. She stood up, her legs shaky but determined. She couldn't ignore what she had learned. There was a dark force at play on Miami Beach, something ancient and vengeful, and it was time for her to uncover the truth. Later that evening, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, Emily found herself standing once again at the edge of Miami Beach. Despite the chaos in her mind and the gnawing fear that had gripped her all day, she couldn't stay away. She had to know more. The men's conversation at the cafe had unsettled her, yes, but it had also sparked something deep within her, a need to understand, to find answers. She had heard the scream, felt the presence of something unnatural, and now it was as if she were drawn to the beach, as if the very sand beneath her feet was calling her back. The night air was thick with the scent of salt water, but there was an odd chill to it tonight. The breeze, normally warm and inviting in Miami, felt cold against her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. The usual sounds of the beach were muffled, almost drowned out by the rushing waves that seemed to grow louder with each step she took. The waves, normally rhythmic and calming, were now aggressive, crashing against the shore with a force that sent mist into the air, making it hard to see clearly. The beach was empty. No tourists, no late-night joggers, no parties along the shore. It was as if the world had faded away, leaving only the sound of the ocean and the eerie silence that hung in the air. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she walked, her footsteps soft against the cool sand. She felt the tension rise, like the calm before a storm. The darkness of the night seemed to stretch on forever. And with each step, the air grew heavier. Could the story the men had told her be true? Was there something out there, beneath the beach, beneath the sand, that was still holding on to its rage after all these years. The scream she had heard the previous night echoed in her mind, growing louder with every passing moment. Was it possible? Could the curse... Then, without warning, the ground beneath her feet shifted. It was subtle at first, like a slight tremor beneath the surface, but it was enough to make Emily stop in her tracks. Her eyes widened as she took a cautious step back, unsure of what she had just felt. It was like the earth was moving, like something underneath was stirring, trying to break free. A low, rumbling noise reverberated through the sand, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't a natural sound. It was too deep, too guttural. It felt like something alive, something powerful, was rising from the depths. The ground beneath her feet seemed to ripple, as if the very earth was alive, and she could almost feel the pull, the pressure, coming from deep beneath the surface. Her pulse quickened, and panic flooded her system. She could no longer stand still. Her legs moved before she could fully process what was happening, and she started to run, her feet pounding against the sand as she tried to put distance between herself and whatever was moving beneath her. But no matter how fast she ran, the feeling of being drawn in, of being pulled back, only intensified. Then it happened again. The scream. This time, it was different. It wasn't the faint, distant cry she had heard the night before. No, this was closer, much closer. It tore through the air like a knife, sharp and filled with pure anguish. The sound echoed in her ears, vibrating through her bones, sending a wave of terror rushing through her body. She stumbled to a halt, her feet dragging in the sand as she struggled to stay upright. The scream wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, a force that filled the air around her. It was as though it was coming from all directions at once, from beneath the sand, from the waves crashing against the shore, from the very sky above. The scream was alive, and it was calling her name. Emily! The voice was unmistakable, and it was coming from the sand. Her blood ran cold as she turned slowly, her body frozen in place. The night was so dark now, the moon barely visible behind a thick veil of clouds. But in the shadows, she saw it, a shape, a shadow, moving beneath the sand. It was subtle at first, just a shift, a slight distortion in the smooth surface of the beach. But then it grew, expanding outward, twisting and writhing, like something was struggling to break free from the earth itself. Emily's breath hitched as she took a step back, her eyes glued to the spot where the shadow seemed to pulse, like it was breathing. The sand began to move more violently now, small mounds rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern, as though something was pushing upward from beneath, desperately trying to escape. And then it emerged. It was a figure, a twisted, dark shape that rose from the sand with an eerie fluidity. It was barely visible at first, just a silhouette against the black sky, but as it rose, Emily could make out the grotesque details. The figure was humanoid in shape, but something about it was wrong, unnatural. It was like a shadow, but one that seemed to distort and twist, as if it were made of darkness itself, its edges flickering and shifting with an almost liquid-like motion. The figure's face, or what she assumed was its face, was the most horrifying thing she had ever seen. It was contorted, a grotesque mask of rage and pain, with eyes that burned like fire, glowing in the darkness. The eyes were the only part of the figure that seemed solid, that seemed alive. They burned into her, and for a moment, she felt as though they were piercing right through her, straight to her soul. Emily, the voice echoed again, though it wasn't the same voice she had heard before. This voice was deeper, more guttural, filled with a terrible anger, and it was coming from the figure itself. Emily's body went numb with fear. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Her legs trembled beneath her, but they wouldn't move. She felt paralyzed, rooted to the spot, as the figure slowly, deliberately, rose higher from the sand. The air around her grew colder, a biting chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. The waves crashed more violently now, the sound deafening, as though the ocean itself was in turmoil. Emily's eyes remained locked on the figure, unable to look away, unable to move. The figure took a step toward her, its movement slow, deliberate. With each step it took, the sand seemed to twist and warp beneath its feet. As it drew closer, Emily's heart raced, the terror building inside her until it felt like her chest would explode. She opened her mouth again, this time managing to force out a breathless whisper. Who are you?" The figure stopped in its tracks, and for a moment, everything went silent. The waves stilled, the wind ceased to blow, and even the night seemed to hold its breath. The figure tilted its head, as if considering her question. Then it spoke again, its voice a low. The word hung in the air, heavy and final, before the figure moved once more, taking another step toward her. Emily's mind screamed at her to run, but her body was frozen in terror, incapable of moving. As the figure drew closer, she felt the overwhelming sense of dread wash over her, the pull of something ancient and powerful, something beyond human comprehension. And in that moment, she knew this was it. The curse, the vengeance, the thing that had been waiting all these years, lying dormant beneath the sands of Miami Beach. And now it was here. Emily's heart raced as she stumbled back to her hotel room, her legs weak with fear, her mind spinning with the horrors she had just witnessed on the beach. The dark figure, its burning eyes, and the voice calling her name echoed in her head. She could still feel the cold air around her, the heaviness in the atmosphere, as if the very beach itself had come alive with anger. She slammed the door behind her, locking it, as though doing so could somehow keep the nightmare at bay. But even as she locked herself in, the images from the beach haunted her. The twisted figure emerging from the sand, the words of vengeance still ringing in her ears. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't think. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the figure, heard the scream, and felt the overwhelming terror she had felt standing on the beach. The silence of her room only made things worse. The quiet seemed to press in on her, filling the space with the same unease she had felt when she was out there on the shore. The weight of what had happened weighed on her chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to focus. But Emily knew one thing. She needed answers. She couldn't just hide from what had happened. She had to understand. She had to find out what this curse was, who Jackson Moore was, and why she had been drawn into this nightmare. The men at the cafe had told her part of the story, but it wasn't enough. She needed more details, more truth. Her fingers hovered over the laptop keyboard as she sat at the small desk in her room, the soft glow of the screen casting an eerie light across the room. She wasn't sure what she was hoping to find, but she knew she couldn't let go of this. Not now. The first few articles she found were vague, just mentions of local legends and ghost stories about Miami Beach. There were articles about strange occurrences, unexplained disappearances, and the occasional mention of a curse that had haunted the area for years. But nothing that truly gave her any insight into the story of Jackson Moore. Frustrated, she dove deeper, scrolling through older newspapers, looking for anything that might give her more context. It took hours of searching, but finally, she found something. Hidden deep in the archives of a Miami-based newspaper, she uncovered an article from the 1940s detailing the mysterious disappearance of a local fisherman. The headline was simple but chilling. Fisherman lost at sea, presumed dead. The article mentioned Jackson Moore, a man who had been a well-known figure in Miami's tight-knit coastal community. He wasn't just a fisherman. He was a family man, a father of two, and a husband to a woman named Clara. He had a reputation for being hardworking and kind, a man respected by the community. But that all changed one fateful night. According to the article, Jackson had been accused of a crime he didn't commit, stealing from the very people he had once worked for. The local elite, a group of influential businessmen who could... According to the article, one night Jackson was found on the beach, beaten and left for dead. The group of businessmen, seeing an opportunity to silence him for good, had arranged for him to be killed. They dragged him to the shore, left him unconscious, and dumped him into the ocean. They thought he had drowned, that his body would wash away, and that they could bury the truth along with him. But the tides had other plans. His body was never recovered. Emily's eyes widened as she read the article, her heart pounding. This was the story the man at the cafe had been talking about. This was the truth she had been searching for. But there was more. The article went on to mention how the locals had whispered about Jackson's spirit, how they said his anger had kept him alive in some twisted form, lingering beneath the sand, waiting for the right moment to return. The fisherman who woke the waters around Miami Beach had long told stories about hearing strange noises, the sound of something, someone, calling out from beneath the waves. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine as she read further. The article described how, over the years, there had been reports of strange occurrences on the beach, disappearances, people feeling an overwhelming sense of dread when walking along the shore at night, and a growing number of people who claimed to have heard the same scream Emily had heard the night before. Some of the locals believed that Jackson's spirit was still trapped beneath the sand, cursed to rise every year and take revenge on those connected to his betrayal. The curse, they said, had become a part of the beach itself, an inescapable presence that no one could avoid. The article ended with a haunting note. It claimed that every year, on the anniversary of Jackson's death, the curse would claim a victim, someone who had either wronged him or had been foolish enough to venture too far into the cursed stretch of beach. The last paragraph was a warning, a plea to anyone reading: stay away from the sands at night. Do not seek what lies beneath. The curse of Jackson Moore is real, and it cannot be escaped. Emily sat back in her chair, her mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle had come together, and she could no longer deny the truth. The scream she had heard, the figure that had risen from the sand, the feeling of being drawn into something much larger than herself. It was all connected to this curse. Jackson Moore hadn't died that night. His spirit had remained, trapped by the anger of his betrayal, waiting for the right moment to rise again. And now, Emily knew that she had unknowingly walked into that moment. The realization hit her hard. She had been drawn to the beach for a reason. The legend was real. She had felt it, felt the presence of something dark, something vengeful, lurking beneath the surface. She wasn't sure how much longer she could stay in Miami, not with the curse now hanging over her head. But leaving wasn't an option. Not yet. She had to find a way to stop it, to somehow break the curse before it claimed another victim. As the weight of the truth settled over her, Emily knew one thing for certain. She couldn't leave Miami without confronting whatever was waiting for her on that beach. She had heard Jackson scream, felt the pull of the curse, and now she had no choice but to face whatever horror lay in the depths of Miami Beach. The legend was no longer just a story. It was her reality, and she had to unravel the truth, no matter the cost. As Emily dove deeper into the history of Miami Beach, her obsession with uncovering the truth about the curse and Jackson Moore's vengeful spirit grew stronger. The more she uncovered, the more she realized how much she had underestimated the depth of the horror surrounding this place. It wasn't just a legend. It was something far more sinister. A malevolent force that had been building for decades, feeding off the anger and betrayal that had kept Jackson Moore's spirit alive for so long. Each day she spent in Miami, the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier, with a sense of dread. The once lively and welcoming city had turned into a place of constant unease. Her nights were plagued with nightmares, vivid images of twisted shadows and burning eyes, while her days were spent researching, trying to piece together the fragmented stories she had uncovered. She found herself walking the beach at night more often, drawn by some invisible force she couldn't explain. But something was wrong. It wasn't just the cursed history of the beach, or the terrifying legend of Jackson Moore that disturbed her. It was the strange things that began to happen. At first it was small, almost insignificant things. She would wake up in the middle of the night to find scratch marks on her hotel room door. Deep, jagged gashes that seemed to appear out of nowhere. She thought it was just her imagination, the product of too much stress and fear. But then the marks became more frequent, more pronounced, as if whatever was haunting her was trying to reach through the walls to get to her. And then the whispers started again. At night, when she lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, she would hear it, the unmistakable sound of a faint, blood-curdling scream, followed by the whispering voices, muffled yet urgent. They seemed to come from beneath the hotel, beneath the very earth itself. She would get up, heart pounding, and peer through the window, but the beach was always empty. The wind would whip the waves into a frenzy, but there were no figures, no signs of life. It was as though the screams came from the sand itself, from the dark void beneath it. Despite her growing fear, Emily couldn't bring herself to leave. Some unseen force was holding her there. It was as if she had become a part of this cursed place, drawn into its web and unable to escape. She tried to leave, to pack her things and flee the terror that had taken root in her mind, but every time she made plans to go, something would stop her. The pull to stay, to find the truth, was too strong. It was as though the beach itself was calling her, urging her to return to the place where everything had begun. One evening, unable to fight the compulsion any longer, Emily returned to the beach. The sun had set, leaving the sky a dark canvas of purples and blues, with a few scattered stars peeking through the clouds. The ocean was still, unnervingly so, as if the water itself was holding its breath. The air was thick with tension, the kind of heaviness that precedes a storm. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she walked along the shore, her footsteps muffled by the soft, wet sand beneath her feet. She had no particular destination in mind, no plan, but the further she walked, the more she felt the presence of something watching her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and the skin on her arms prickled with cold, even though the temperature was unseasonably warm for the time of year. She glanced around, but the beach was still deserted, just as it had been before. The usual noise of Miami was far behind her, and there was only the sound of the crashing waves, growing louder and more aggressive with each passing moment. As she continued walking, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift. It wasn't just the natural shifting of sand, but something more, something subtle, like a tremor running through the earth itself. Her eyes darted down to the sand, and for a split second, she thought she saw something move beneath the surface. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there. A shifting, a slight disturbance in the sand, as though something was rising from the depths. And then, she saw it. At the edge of the water, standing just where the waves lapped at the shore, was a figure, a shadow, dark and indistinct, barely visible against the night. It was the same shape she had seen before, the same twisted silhouette that haunted her dreams and thoughts. Jackson Moore. But something was different this time. His form was more solid, more defined, but his face was no longer human. It was a grotesque mask of scars and rage, twisted and deformed beyond recognition. His eyes, those terrible burning eyes, glowed with an unnatural light, and they locked onto her with an intensity that sent a chill through her entire being. There was no warmth in them, no human trace left, only pure, unrelenting anger. Emily froze, her body paralyzed with terror. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, as though his eyes were burning through her very soul. Her heart thundered in her chest, each beat louder than the crashing waves, but her legs wouldn't move. It was as if her body was refusing to obey her mind, frozen in place by the sheer horror of the figure before her. She wanted to run, to scream, but her body betrayed her. The figure took a step forward, its movements slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. The sand beneath its feet seemed to crack and shift with each step, as if the ground itself were unwilling to support the weight of such an evil presence. Emily's breath quickened, her eyes wide with fear as she tried to back away, but her feet remained rooted in the sand, as though they were stuck in place by an invisible force. Suddenly, the ground cracked open beneath her, and a cold, clammy hand shot up from the earth, wrapping around her ankle. It was a hand made of sand and shadow, its fingers long and skeletal, its grip unyielding. Emily screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the crashing waves. Her body jerked in panic, but the hand tightened, dragging her toward the open ground, toward the gaping hole that had appeared beneath her. She fought, her legs kicking and thrashing, but the hand wouldn't let go. She felt the coldness of the earth seep into her skin, the darkness of the sand wrapping around her, pulling her deeper. Her screams echoed in her ears, but no one was there to hear them, no one to help her. She was alone, alone with the vengeful spirit that had risen from the depths of the beach to claim her. The figure, Jackson Moore, moved closer, his eyes locked on her as he stepped forward, each movement more fluid, more powerful than the last. He spoke, but his voice wasn't a whisper. It was a low, guttural growl that resonated from deep within the earth, from the depths of the curse itself. "You cannot escape," he said, his voice a twisted blend of anger and sorrow. "No one can escape the vengeance of the buried." With one final desperate scream, Emily was pulled into the earth. The ground swallowed her whole, dragging her down into the darkness. The last thing she saw before the world went black was the figure of Jackson Moore standing at the edge of the water, his eyes still burning with rage, as if he had claimed yet another victim in his endless quest for vengeance. And then there was nothing. Only the crushing darkness of the earth, a place of endless torment and despair. Emily's screams echoed through the night, but no one was there to hear them. The darkness of the beach swallowed her whole, devouring every sound, every trace of her presence, until all that remained was silence. The earth seemed to pulse with a strange, unnatural rhythm as it pulled her deeper, dragging her toward some unfathomable place beneath the sands. Her body was weightless, as if the very ground had claimed her, holding her in an unbreakable grip. She reached out, her fingers grasping at the air, trying to find something to hold on to, something to keep her from descending further into the blackness. But there was nothing, only the cold, suffocating embrace of the earth, the gritty texture of the sand slipping through her fingers as she fell. Her thoughts were a blur, scattered fragments of fear and confusion. But one thing remained clear. She was not alone. Jackson Moore's presence lingered in the air, his vengeful spirit watching, waiting, as he had for so many others before her. She could feel his eyes on her, burning with hatred, even as the darkness enveloped her. The sand continued to pull her down, the ground shifting and crackling as if it were alive. She tried to scream again, but the words caught in her throat, silenced by the weight of the earth that seemed to close in on her, suffocating her with each passing second. There was no escape, no chance for survival, only the endless descent into the depths of the beach, where Jackson's curse awaited. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything went black. The world around her vanished, leaving only the emptiness of the earth, the endless nothingness that seemed to stretch on forever. Emily's last thought, the only thought that lingered in her fading mind, was that the curse would never end. Jackson Moore's vengeance was eternal, and no one could escape its grasp. She was just another victim, another soul claimed by the sands of Miami Beach. Years passed, and the beach remained unchanged. The sound of the waves continued to crash against the shore, the steady rhythm of the ocean unaffected by the passage of time. But the curse, the dark force that had claimed so many lives before, still lingered beneath the surface, waiting for the next person to make the mistake of venturing too far. The whispers, the screams, they never stopped. They just waited, quietly, beneath the sand, for someone to listen closely enough, for someone to hear the call. Locals continued to speak of the legends that surrounded Miami Beach, tales of strange occurrences and eerie happenings that seemed to defy logic. They spoke of the curse, of Jackson Moore's vengeful spirit that still haunted the beach, taking anyone who dared to walk too far into its depths. And they spoke of Emily, the young woman who had vanished without a trace, her disappearance a mystery that no one could solve. Some believed she had been taken by the curse, another victim of Jackson's unyielding anger. Others claimed she had simply run away, her fear driving her to disappear into the night. But the truth, the terrifying truth, was that she had been claimed by the sands. She was another soul lost to the curse of Miami Beach, another scream lost to the darkness. The years passed, but the legend never died. The stories of the vanished, the cursed, continued to be passed down from generation to generation, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. But the core of the story remained the same. The curse was real, and no one who ventured too far into the sands was ever safe. The whispers still lingered, just beneath the surface, waiting for someone to hear them. And in the quiet moments of the night, when the beach was empty and the world seemed still, those who were brave enough to listen might hear the faintest echo of Emily's scream, carried on the wind, a warning to anyone who dared to wander too far. But the curse, it seemed, could never be broken. It was a force that had existed for far longer than anyone realized, a dark, ancient presence that had been birthed from betrayal, anger, and vengeance. Jackson Moore's spirit would never rest, not until it had claimed every soul it was destined to take. And so the cycle continued, each year bringing new victims, new stories of the vengeful spirit beneath the sands. For those who lived in the area, the tales were a reminder of the danger that lurked just beneath the surface. They knew better than to walk too far along the beach at night, knew better than to ignore the warnings that had been passed down through generations. They knew the cost of curiosity, the price of ignoring the whispers. Because the whispers, they knew, were never just a story. They were a warning, a signal from the past, a reminder that vengeance always waits. Some still believed that Emily's disappearance was just a coincidence, a tragic incident that could be explained away. But those who truly knew the curse of Miami Beach, those who had heard the stories and felt the presence that lingered on the sands, knew the truth. They knew that Jackson Moore's vengeance was still alive, waiting for the next person to make the mistake of walking too far, of hearing the screams beneath the sand. And so, the legend of Miami Beach lived on, carried in whispers, in stories, in the very fabric of the beach itself. The curse had not been broken, and it never would be. It was a part of the land, a part of the history that would never fade. For anyone brave enough to walk along the beach at night, for anyone foolish enough to ignore the warnings, the curse was always there, waiting. The whispers were always there, calling out to those who would listen. And the spirit of vengeance, Jackson Moore, would always rise again, claiming his next victim. As the years went by, the beach remained unchanged, still beautiful, still haunting, still cursed. The waves crashed against the shore, and the sands shifted, hiding the dark secrets beneath. And for anyone who dared to listen closely enough, they might hear the faint echoes of the past, the whispers of those who had been lost to the curse. They might hear the final scream, the warning that had been passed down through the ages. But they would never be able to escape it. Because vengeance, like the sands of Miami Beach, always waits.